Wrath of Angels. Chapter 3, Scene 4, Consecration of the Wrath. Aboard the former ship, the Spear of Caliban. Month 3, year 260, the 41st millennium. The nave emptied down to its bones. Cranes slept with their hooks raised like quiet threats. Chains were coiled, torches lowered until their flames were the size of prayer beads. Angels carved along the pillars let their eyes return to stone. Only angels of flesh and armor remained at floor level. Helms off, faces bared, and above them, tucked behind the choir screen like gilt in a chest, mortals were permitted to watch if they agreed not to be seen doing it. The altar was a block the color of old teeth, veined with iron threads that looked like hair. On it lay the rites implements, a humble butcher's knife honed to reverence by use, a shallow bowl blackened by a century of heat, a square of vellum so pale the letters on it only existed for the soul, a tray of oil that held a floating wick but no flame. Relics waited like witnesses along the step, a helm bound in parchment stamped remember, a mace head with tally scar rose left unpolished, a sword wrapped in too many seals. The cracked bell sat sullen on its trestle, refusing the pitch that had been asked of it all afternoon. Malchadek mounted the dais. His boots made no sound the first 2 steps, and a deliberate sound on the third, as if negotiating with the altar for the right to stand upon it. He set the crozius down, and its head touched stone with the intimacy of an old friend who has outlived all but one of his companions. The watchers drifted into a triangle around the altar's corners and arranged their small hands into the geometry of agreement. Wrath of Angels, Malchadek said, and did not project. He pitched the words like coins aimed for a particular rung in a particular well. You are not a found thing. Varadiel entered opposite him, staff vertical, gem breathing a slow sea light. Seraphiel remained at the base of the steps, helm tucked in the crook of his arm, cloak fallen straight. He was the hinge upon which the rest of the room turned even while standing still. The first cut was Malchadek's. The butcher's knife had been made for meat and cloth, not mail. He held it the way a man holds a tool that has always done exactly what it promised. The line he drew across his palm was neat, exact, without flourish. Blood fell in a little rain. The stone drank like a thing that had just remembered thirst. Bone remembers, Athel said from the outer ring, the words not a chant but an attendance call. The Deathwing echoed him, a murmured roll of present that was not for ears. Seraphiel reached with his left hand and drew the blade with a surgeon's economy across the wrist. His blood fell heavier, as if it had been learned to be heavy. Duty is what remains when words have failed, he said, as if finishing a conversation that had started the day he learned to stand. Varadiel cut where the lifeline curved toward the thumb. A single bead formed, then another, each round as a jewel. Sight is not permission, he said. Sight is weight. When his blood touched the stone, the staff's hum rotated by a fraction, a sound like a book turned sideways and read as a map. From the gallery, Lisa's breath snagged. She pressed her wrist to her mouth and held the rosary through cloth so the beads would not show. Her skull felt thin. She whispered the harvest prayer's last line, and it came back to her in a voice that was hers and not hers, as if the ship had repeated it behind her teeth. Jask tried to count bolts along the rail to steady his head, and found the numbers that had carried him all day uncooperative. The deck was breathing a different beat. He watched the drops in the bowl hit each other and become a thing that was neither drop, nor bowl, nor air. A third thing, new and inevitable. The knife passed like a title from hand to hand. Palms opened. The altar kept its patience. Some angels bled like clocks, others like weather. Oil was drawn across foreheads. Circles were traced on breastplates and smeared faintly onto the lips of weapons that worshipped truth by breaking bone. A Deathwing knight held his mace up, and the oil gathered in the grooves of tally scars until the marks looked like lines on a palm that someone had written their fate in and tried to blot. "Begin the palms," Malchadek said. They came forward in turn, ring by ring. Each leaned the heel of the hand into the altar. The blade whispered. Blood went down. With the seventh palm, the nave gave a long, pleased creak, as if a weight had found its rightful shelf. With the ninth, one angel in stained glass blinked. No one said they saw it. Athel saw it and did not tell anyone. Secrets shared too soon rot. Varadiel's eyes filmed halfway. The wrath did not speak to him in words. The ship described itself by pressure and refusal, by small decisions that felt like tide on stones. It pressed against his mind with its own weather. He let it. In the press, he saw something more remembered than imagined. Caliban's forests under rain, a long shadow like a wing that could have been a branch, a smell of sap like a story told by a tree to a child who would grow up to be steel. Then the taste of ash burned all that away. Screams reached him, not from this room, but from a room that had not yet been built. He was both the rope and the hand that held it. He shifted his weight, and the staff scolded him gently for moving while listening. In the choir's shadow, the astropaths stood open-mouthed in disciplined emptiness. One woman's jaw moved without sound until the next exhale took on shape. A syllable escaped that felt like frost touching the eye. Torches bowed their flames in an unseen wind. A watcher's hand rose. The syllable curled back into the woman's mouth like a snake, deciding it preferred the basket. Her face went flat again, beautiful, in a way that was not for mortals. Malchadek took up the cracked bell. He did not strike it. He set the crozier's head against its broken lip and let weight do what force could not. "Silence in thunder," he murmured. The bell answered with a note that climbed and fell simultaneously, a sound that lived where decision lives. Men who had wronged others felt ribs go hollow and cold air enter places that had no business knowing weather. The note ended and left the shape of itself behind, like pain remembered after it has stopped, like a face you only realize was present when you notice the room is less crowded now. The stained glass above the nave brightened. No lumen changed, no torch flared. The colors simply fattened until they shone like wet paint. On one panel, an angel's chiseled-out face reappeared as light only. Not a man, not a name, only the suggestion that identity had once been offered and then denied. "Mark the altar," Malchadek said. He spread his hand on the stone and pressed until the cut sang. One by one, the inner circle followed suit. The nave learned their palm lines. The altar remembered them. Blood did not pool. It disappeared with the modest hunger of a root. From the sealed hangar, beyond the wall and a long corridor, metal ticked. It could have been cooling. It could have been a dream flexed in sleep. The watchers at that door leaned closer without moving their feet, and then leaned back in the way that means agreement. Seraphiel did not mount the dais. He did not need the height. He watched the rite as if stock-taking a store he would inherit. He absorbed its balance. Tools, words, cuts, light. The way weight traveled across the room, the way a decision travels down a chain of command and becomes many hands doing one act. He noted who bled quickly and who took time, who watched the knife and who did not, who pressed his palm and who allowed it to be guided. He watched Malchadek and measured the tremor that arrived in the chaplain's hand and left again halfway through the rite, like a guest who came only to be noticed leaving. He looked last at the final relic, not yet placed on the altar. A bracer of dented plate wrapped in vellum stitched with hair-thin wires of bronze. Script crawled across the vellum like an ant patient to cross desserts. No name was written there. Instead, there were 100 dates, burnt very small, and beside each a pair of letters: CL, CB, VR. Some meant nothing to him. Some meant more than they should. He read them the way a man reads a plaque on a ruined wall, for what is missing, for what someone tried to save by nailing it to stone. He did not touch the bracer. He turned its cradle with one finger so the dates would face the nave. "Witness," he said, and the word went everywhere it needed to go. A ripple traveled the hull, not a tremor, not a shudder, a settling. Plates shifted by distances that could not be measured with tools and could be felt by the bones. Vox-lines muttered and then shut their mouths with the decorum of men in a chapel who remember they are not at market. The hum of the Geller veins lowered by half a note, the difference between a man who stands at attention and the same man who decides he can bear to stand like that longer than he thought. Varadiel swayed once. The staff knuckled against the floor and stood upright, not because of balance, but because it refused to demonstrate effort. He saw, for a blink, the ruin storm distorting space like hot air does the view over a road. The Spear of Caliban's silhouette flensed down to ribs, a bridge soaked in the kind of light that never belonged to stars. He saw a man with a lion on his shoulder turn his head, not away, not toward, to mark that he had registered a thing and could not afford more than that. The vision smeared away like grease under a thumb. Varadiel breathed. Frost nicked the corner of his mouth and melted. "By oath and iron," Malchadek said, and dropped each word into the room with the gravity of a coin into a depth where you wait to hear nothing return. "By silence and memory, by sins we will not name. This monastery is awake." The reply was made of signs. Torches straightened themselves with no wind. The cracked bell gave a single true chime, and then behaved as if it had been taught manners. An auspex slate forgotten on a bench spat a single line of green light, and drew, with shy precision, the rune scholars would disagree over for a century. Closure, or perhaps covenant. A hairline seam along the port transept closed itself, with the quiet, determined sound of a thing fulfilling its design after an insult. Lysa wept without knowing when she started. The tears felt clean and wrong in equal measure. She smiled, which was exactly the wrong thing, and then pressed the smile into the shape of a prayer until the face that felt like hers returned. Her hands were steady now. She would not notice until night that they had learned to be. Jask finally found his numbers again. 27, 42. They had not betrayed him. He had betrayed them by trying to force them onto a room that had decided to become larger in a dimension he could not name. He counted the steps down from the gallery to prove to himself the world still kept its side of that small bargain. It did. On the altar, Malchadek cleaned the knife with a corner of vellum that would not show the blood it took. He slid the blade back into its leather pocket. The watchers realigned themselves to the corners they had occupied at the start, completing a shape that was not a square but remembered one. The cracked bell loitered on its trestle, as if sulking that it had behaved and now was bored again. "Work," Seraphiel said into shipwide Vox. He did not shout. He hoarded volume for the moments when someone might try to steal the ship from him with noise. Wrath of Angels, Catalogue, Quarter, Secure, Choir, Dampen, Armories, Open to First Tier, Ravenwing, Stow, Deathwing, Ring the Vault Corridors. Systems heard the commander's voice and took it for their own instructions. Choir dampers slid down, mouths closed one by one behind the gate like lamps covered with clay. Armory doors sighed and settled into new tolerances that could now be trusted to hold when shouted. A hinge that had always complained in a stubborn key tried its old note and found it would not come. It settled for a better one. Mordain swung a leg over the nearest bike and let the engine cough once, a polite noise in a church. Crooked roads, he told it, because machines like secret names, and the engine's note smoothed into a predator's purr, as if pleased to be recognized. Athel lifted his shield and set its edge down with the tenderness one saves for knives and oaths. Bone remembers, he said again, but the words had rounded. They were no longer tally but vow. Varadiel looked up. His eyes were wet the way eyes get wet when wind is honest. He had not meant them to be. He ignored the sting and took inventory of his mind. It was still there. He tasted sap and ash in equal measure and decided neither would be thrown away. Malchadek flexed his cut until it sang and then bounded. The crozier's head he set for a moment against the altar and felt stone press back. He allowed himself the weakness of imagining a different life, a different room, a chair he would not have to stand behind, a rope he would not have to name. He killed the thought the way one kills small things quickly to prevent suffering and consequence. Cells, he said to Seraphiel as they crossed on the lower step, voice pitched for one pair of ears, and a ship that eavesdropped only on purpose, and a place where voices are not wasted on walls. Seraphiel inclined his head the distance between consent and command. Plenty of walls, he said. We'll find the right ones. They parted with the efficiency of men who have no time to be pleased with each other. Commander to bridge, chaplain to shadow, seer to the choir where the blind waited with eyes open to things that did not shine. The Death Wing reformed their rings along the vault approaches. The Raven Wing ghosted away into galleries that were starting to learn their names. The Green Wing became walls where there had been only space. From the sealed hangar, 3 ticks came from the night, spaced like breaths. The watchers at the door did not move. Their hoods tilted, as if listening to a dream trying to drum its way out of a skull. One placed a tiny hand to the portal, and the sound changed its mind about being a 3rd tick and decided to be nothing. The stained glass dimmed back to ordinary saints. Torches agreed to be merely torches. The nave, left alone with itself, made a sound like a page turned in a very old book. It was not a promise. It was appetite given a rule. Malchadek descended the dais and paused before the cracked bell. He lifted it by the torn ear and carried it to a niche where nothing had ever sat and everything had been waiting. It fit. That was the point. He looked at the niche for the length of a blink and then stopped looking at it, because looking always feeds the wrong wolf. Varadiel paused at the choir gate and set 2 fingers to the iron. Behind his eyelids, in a place that would become very familiar to him, a white door stuck and yielded and stuck again. He smiled without his mouth. He hated that he could. Seraphiel stood at the bottom of the steps long enough for the ship to understand that the rite was not a break from work, but the kind of work that lets other work matter. He turned on his heel, and the ring broke without sound. Men went to their duties, like hammers returning to their racks. The Wrath listened to the retreating boots and liked them. Her tone had found the register she would keep until men with other banners tried to make her sing a different note. She would disappoint them. She had been taught to. This has been Wrath of Angels, Chapter 3, Scene 4, Consecration of the Wrath. Chapter 4, Scene 1 follows.